What was OJ dealing with health-wise over the last month or so? He posted some videos talking about how good he felt and how he didn't have any health issues, but clearly something was going on.
Well, he never said he didn't have health issues. I think the last post he made was slightly over 2 months ago. And in that post, people were giving him well wishes and things like that. There had been a recent report that he had cancer and that he was getting treated for it, which is accurate. But if you want to be very accurate, Mr. Simpson was diagnosed with prostate cancer several years ago. And so he beat it the first time. He actually talked about that in, I believe, a Twitter post last May or something, that he was feeling great because he had beat it. He felt anew. And then recently, obviously, it obviously made a return. That or some consequence of the original cancer made a return, and he started having more and more health issues related to that. So you can't just say it was the cancer. It was the cancer and a 76-year-old, and he already had high blood pressure, and he already had arthritis and these issues and some heart issues. So it's just a consequence of a lot of things that just basically, if you ask me, I'm not a doctor, but I was able to observe him on a regular basis. I think he just died basically of old age and some type of consequence of a cancer.
Was he in hospice care?
Technically, yes. That was the last maybe close to 2 weeks. So, and if your audience doesn't know what hospice is, that's a medical term. That is when someone basically needs care, but when they accept what's considered hospice care or that hospice level care, what they're basically agreeing to is that they're not going to go back to the hospital for emergency type treatments. All right,
so end of life care.
They call it end of life care. They call that thing, although some people do make it out of hospice. Okay, but in his case, he'd go to the hospital and then he'd come out, and even until the end, the very end, not the very end, but last few weeks. Last times he went to the hospital, he would drive himself to the hospital. This was not like he needed an ambulance to take him to the hospital. He would drive to the hospital. And then at some point, and people can relate to this who've had either family members or themselves, they come to a point where they've had it with going to hospital, even though the hospital could probably keep them, and doing these really intensive treatments could probably keep them around another 6 months, 9 months, a year plus. He made the decision to say, look, I'm just going to take my chances. I will take the hospice, and I'm going to go home, and I'm going to die in my home. He made a very beautiful home for himself. He made a very beautiful home for himself here in Vegas, and he was just going to take his chances that he was going to die in his home rather than take his chances of dying in a hospital.
You spent the morning with the family. What can you tell me about that?
The morning today, I've been over there quite a bit. All right, so the morning today, I can tell you that some funeral arrangements have been made as far as planning, and I can also tell you that the process of winding up his estate is beginning. That's what I can tell you right now.
And there are questions about his estate, especially looking at the civil judgment awarded in California and all of the monies still owed to Nicole Brown Simpson's family and Ron Goldman's family based on that judgment that have yet to be paid. Can you shed some light on what the probate process might yield along the lines of that judgment?
Well, let me tell you a couple of things. First of all, I'm not a probate lawyer or an estate planning lawyer. That is a very specialized area of law that most lawyers who are outside of it don't understand much of it. And so on that one, I'm going to generally defer to an estate planning expert. So I would highly encourage you or anyone to have someone on who's a Nevada, and that's all they do is estate planning, and they can give you a lot of answers. You can throw these fact patterns into them, and they'll give you a lot of answers to that. Second, though, is I am the executor of Mr. Simpson's estate, the entire estate, A to Z, okay? And I'm not going to explain what trust documents or excuse me, what type of estate documents are involved, but I'm the executor. And so I will be involved in it now. I was his attorney for 15 years, and now I will remain on as the executor of the estate. And with regards to that, I have my own counsel, and we've been talking about this. And it is curious. Maybe curious isn't the right word. It is peculiar, the public perception versus the legal perception, okay? And what I mean by that is everyone is heralding these judgments, these civil judgments, and all these, and what they mean and what the import of them, and people have been on talking about them. But really, these claims are just creditors' claims, all right? So what these creditors that you mentioned, these civil judgments, what they're going to realize very quickly is that they come in a pecking order. And like I said, an estate lawyer can tell you this with a lot more detail. The creditors that come above are people who contributed to funeral expenses, but as far as a real creditor that would be of some importance, it's not those publicity creditors, and I'll characterize them as publicity characters. Mr. Simpson has IRS debt. There's IRS debt that's going to be out there. Don't want to go into any more about it, but it's substantial. And then a host of other creditors. There's going to be a notice to creditors. So that's a part of the process. And then when those claims come in, we will deal with them, and they'll be in a pecking order, right? So I will go along with the reality show of these California judgments, these unsecured civil monetary judgments, if the media wants to go along with them, because that seems to be what they want to talk about. I haven't watched a lot of TV, but I have heard that, and people have come out and talked about those judgments. But from the executor's angle, it will simply be about getting CPAs involved and getting counsel if we need to get them involved, and dealing with creditors in a pecking order. But that's those judgments that you talk about, they're just not on my radar screen. They're free like every other creditor out there, and there will be a bunch of creditors out there to do their claims, come in and let the paperwork fly. At the end, there will be an accounting, and if there's something there, creditors need to be paid if there is something there, and then the rest will go to designees or beneficiaries. So it's just kind of like a process. But all the other things that are out there that you see going on, and I haven't seen it all, but what I did see kind of makes me smirk a little bit, because no one has any more priority than the IRS usually.
You mentioned if there's anything there or what there is there. Can you shed any light on the state of his assets?
I can't really right now, other than just basic things. Obviously when someone dies, they will have personal belongings. Those are all part of the estate. Personal belongings, anything they have like that is going to be part of the estate. So I will be doing inventorying and trying to see what is out there. So as the executor, and we'll figure it all out. This is something that professionals can help you with, and that's what it will be. These things are really a numbers game and an accounting game. And my suspicion is that because of Mr. Simpson's fame, and not just he doesn't have just a modest amount of fame, he's an incredibly famous person. And there's no such thing as notoriety in this world anymore. That's just my perception. All right, it's all fame. Just look at the world that I live in. I mean, your perception may be different, but everyone's just famous. So we will just do all the things to make that accounting. People can come in and make objections, do whatever they want, get their own lawyers. It just is a numbers game, and that's basically where we're at with this.
He leaves behind a very complicated legacy.
Everyone's been saying that word.
I don't know of a better one. What term would you use?
Well, I'll tell you what, if you want me to step back, I've been his advocate for many years, but if you want me to step back from it and be objective, as a lawyer to be objective from it, I'll tell you something, Darcy, this is a very violent country, and there are lots and lots of people who do lots and lots of bad things and go on trial for them, okay? It just so happens that there was something back in the 90s that happened here, the LA thing that happened, and he went on trial for it. And the biggest difference between that case and any other homicide case, and we have them here locally, people beating double murders all the time, it happens, and it does happen that people beat homicides, okay? The difference is that the person involved in that LA thing was already a very famous person, and he had a superpower, you understand? He actually, if you think about it, Mr. Simpson had 3 superpowers. Obviously he had physical superpower because he was a world-class track athlete. He was a world-class running back, and he just was good at sports. So he had that one superpower, and then he had the superpower of movies and entertainment. So he had in marketing. Let's package all that up. He had the superpower of that, and then he had the superpower of just show business in general. Like he really just had those superpowers that drew people into him and his personality. So everyone struggles with this idea of my God, he had it all. He had it all. So then you come into the sensationalism. He had it all. He had it all. He had it all. And then there was a downfall. So it does really play out in many ways like a Shakespearean play or anything that you can think of along the lines of art. But in reality, Mr. Simpson was just the man about town here. He had a great last 7 years here in Vegas. That's the biggest irony. Vegas, where he had to go to camp and take some time out from society, he comes out to a new world, okay? And the world of Vegas, he was only going to stay in Vegas for a few months. He's like, he's got to find his way to Florida, but he comes to Vegas, and he absolutely fell in love with it. People were coming to him. I was so concerned about him coming to Vegas. I knew privately he was going to come to Vegas for a little bit, and I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? You know, this guy, you know, the way the mainstream media had it going at the time, this guy was going to be the biggest pariah on the planet. He comes out, people are there were no selfies when he went in to camp, and all of a sudden everyone has a smartphone. It's selfies, it's people coming up, giving him this, wanting, giving him that, giving him anything. And he says he didn't like it because he was very nonchalant about this. He was just kind of OJ, but he liked that. He liked that. He liked people coming up to him and befriending him, and he would. But the biggest thing that Mr. Simpson had that separates him from most individuals is it didn't matter whether it was one of his billionaire friends, of which he still had, all right? And he had a lot of still very wealthy friends who flew in all from, all over the country. They flew in from all over the country to see him in his final days. It didn't matter whether it was those guys, or it didn't matter if it was the guy who was, I don't want to demean any profession, who was maybe like the mechanic or something like that, just the working class Joe. Mr. Simpson treated them all equally, and he could have a good time with them all equally. And that's a trait that I don't believe you can train yourself to do. You just have to have that in you. And so it made him infinitely compelling. But ultimately, back to your original point, these were homicide cases, and the person who went on trial for it was extraordinarily famous. And you throw a few more things into that, and you have this 3-decade legacy of drama. And I kind of ride the tidal wave of it too. But since I'm on the inside, day to day, pay my bills and, golf and take care of family and take care of grandkids and deal with all these issues. That's what Mr. Simpson was doing most of his time, just being an ordinary human being.
What was your last conversation with him?
Now that's an esoteric question because, and the reason I say that is the last time he was really with it, in other words, he was back and forth the way we're talking here, was right before Easter, I would say about a week before Easter. It was right before I went on a European trip that went through the Easter time, and I went over to his place, and he was sitting down, having a good time, drinking beer, and he was out, and we just had a conversation, and that's when we talked about all kinds of things, my upcoming trip. We had a conversation about lots and lots of different things. I obviously saw him when when the doctor basically came in, this would have been last Friday, and said, Mr. Simpson is transitioning. And I knew what that term meant. When I first heard that term, because I've dealt with family members who've transitioned, when I first heard that term, it kind of throws you off. Like, what do you mean transitioning? It's called active dying, if your audience doesn't know. They basically say there is a very finite window that you pretty much don't get out of transitioning. You might go to hospice and get out, but transitioning, I don't know if you get out of that. So that was last Friday. I wasn't planning on seeing him then. I was actually very busy, but when I heard that tag, I got out and I stopped what I was doing and went and spent about 4 hours with him on Friday. I was going out of town on Saturday, so I didn't spend any time with him on Saturday. Sunday I came back, spent two times I spent time, two different times I spent with him on Sunday. Monday I was there with him. Tuesday I was there with him. And then there was Wednesday where I had no intention of going over there. Let OJ enjoy his family, do that. And interestingly, when I was watching a preview of the Masters, right there I says, you know what? It might be nice tomorrow, which would have been Thursday. It might be nice to go over there and enjoy the Masters with Mr. Simpson. And of course that day never came. So by the time, so go backwards. Friday, I spent time with him. I would come in and basically he, that's what I'm saying. There was, I don't want to get into exactly what was going on at that time, but there was not a tremendous back and forth. I may be able to get into it later, but that was not those were no longer functional back and forth conversations.
How has his family told you they want him to be remembered?
They haven't told me how they want him to be remembered, and that would be the DNA of Mr. Simpson, because Mr. Simpson no longer was concerned about this thing called legacy that they talk about. What is his legacy? I don't think I've ever heard that term come out of his mouth. By the time he came to me, and by the time I started representing him, or certainly after he got out of camp, he did what Lance Armstrong did, and I think Lance Armstrong perfected it from OJ, and then OJ may have re-perfected it from Lance Armstrong when he got out of camp, and that's this principle. And it's a principle that says, look, sometimes you're involved in things that are so controversial, that make you so polarizing, and make you, people still kind of like love you for a reason, and then of course there's this other side that doesn't like you anymore. And who has the power in that situation? And Lance Armstrong said it in a podcast within the last year or something. He was on someone's investment show, and he said this. He says, you either, when you get that lifestyle and have something like that happens to you, you either choose to make the choice. You either make the choice to live with it, or you don't. And you can just go basically die and crawl under a hole. And Lance Armstrong said, I've chosen to live with it. And he's just gone on with his life. He says some people sometimes occasionally say nasty things to him, but most of the time he lives a really, really nice, charmed life. And the same thing goes for Mr. Simpson. He made the choice to just simply live with it and start living his life. And once he perfected that, he had a great rest of his life. So, and I can totally confirm to you that he died a very happy man. Just like anyone else, he would have liked to have a few more years, but he died very happy and very content.